Every parent knows what it's like to be overlooked at work for putting family first. Single dad Marcus Blake had watched younger pilots get promoted while he left early for school pickup and missed weekend briefings for Little League games. At Blackhawk Airbase, dedication meant long hours and office politics. Marcus chose bedtime stories instead. Then came the crisis nobody could solve. A $100 million military project was failing. The Pentagon's best minds were stumped. Careers hung in the balance. In 30 seconds at a chalkboard, Marcus fixed what months of meetings couldn't, but would proving himself finally earn the respect he deserved? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm buzzed at 05:45 hours, same as every weekday for the past 6 years. Marcus Blake rolled out of bed with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to maximize every minute. Down the hall, his 9-year-old daughter Chloe still slept soundly, her sandy hair spread across the pillow like a halo. He paused at her doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, feeling that familiar tug between duty and devotion that defined his every day. Marcus had worn his flight jacket for so long that the leather had molded to his shoulders like a second skin. Inside the breast pocket, carefully folded between his identification cards and flight checklist, lived a small piece of construction paper. Chloe had drawn it 3 months ago, a stick-figure pilot holding hands with a stick-figure girl, both standing in front of what she assured him was definitely an F-16 fighter jet, though it looked more like a flying rectangle with wings. The crayon had faded slightly, but he carried it everywhere. The morning routine was sacred. Coffee first, black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead. Then breakfast prep while reviewing the day's flight schedule. Chloe emerged at exactly 6:30, her internal clock as reliable as any military timepiece. She wore her favorite purple t-shirt with a cartoon astronaut on the front, paired with jeans that were getting too short, but which she refused to replace. "Morning, kiddo," Marcus said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs across the kitchen counter. "Soccer practice after school today?" "Uh-huh. Coach Peterson says we might scrimmage against the high school JV team if we do good in practice." Chloe attacked her breakfast with the enthusiasm of someone who viewed eating as fuel for more important activities. "Will you be there?" "Wouldn't miss it." Marcus checked his watch. "Base meeting ends at 1400 hours. Practice starts at 15:30. I'll be there with time to spare." It was a promise he'd kept for 3 seasons running, even when it meant declining optional training sessions or skipping the informal gatherings, where career advancement often happened over beers and war stories. Other pilots noticed. Some respected it. Others whispered that Blake lacked commitment, that he'd plateaued at his current rank because he prioritized kids' games over military excellence. The drive to Blackhawk Airbase took 22 minutes through desert terrain that never seemed to change. Marcus had made this journey over 800 times, watching the sun climb over distant mountains while Chloe dozed in the passenger seat or chattered about school projects and playground politics. The base appeared gradually, first the outer perimeter fence, then the guard towers. Finally, the massive hangar structures that house some of the most advanced aircraft in the world. "Have a good day, Dad," Chloe said as he dropped her at Creekside Elementary. "Don't crash any planes." "That's the plan." He watched her backpack disappear through the school's front doors before heading to the base proper. Blackhawk Airbase hummed with constant activity. Ground crews moved between aircraft like choreographed dancers, their movements precise and purposeful. The scent of aviation fuel hung in the desert air, mixed with hydraulic fluid and the metallic tang of heated metal. Marcus had grown to love these smells. They meant home in a way that surprised him. The pilot-ready room buzzed with conversation as Marcus entered. Major David Cross stood near the assignment board, his uniform pressed to parade standards, despite the fact that he'd be climbing into a cockpit within the hour. Cross had joined the program 2 years after Marcus, but had already received his second promotion. He possessed the kind of aggressive confidence that impressed review boards and commanding officers. "Blake," Cross nodded. "Heard you're on the Phoenix test schedule today." "That's right." Marcus checked the board. Phoenix Defense Project, third round of preliminary testing. The program had consumed massive resources over the past 18 months, developing what was supposed to be the most advanced targeting system ever integrated into military aircraft. Results had been mixed at best. "Good luck with that disaster," Cross muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. "My money says they cancel the whole thing before Christmas." Marcus didn't respond. He'd learned that defending projects, especially troubled ones, was often interpreted as making excuses. Better to let his flying speak for itself. The Phoenix project occupied Hangar 7, a cavernous space that could house 4 aircraft simultaneously. Today it held just one, a modified F-16 bristling with experimental equipment. The targeting system represented years of engineering work and approximately $97 million in development costs. On paper, it should have been revolutionary. In practice, it had failed every major test. Commander Janet Rivera stood near the aircraft, reviewing data on a tablet. Rivera had earned her position through a combination of technical brilliance and political savvy that made her both respected and slightly feared throughout the base. She glanced up as Marcus approached. "Blake, ready for another round of expensive failure?" "Ready to fly, ma'am." Marcus began his pre-flight inspection, running his hands along control surfaces with the careful attention of someone who understood that mechanical perfection often meant the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic. "The targeting algorithms are still problematic," Rivera continued. "Engineering thinks they've isolated the issue to timing synchronization, but frankly, I think the entire approach is flawed. We're trying to force technology to work faster than physics allows." The flight itself lasted 93 minutes. Marcus put the aircraft through every scenario the engineers requested, pushing the experimental systems to their operational limits, while maintaining the kind of precise control that had earned him a reputation as one of the program's most reliable test pilots. The targeting system performed marginally better than previous iterations, but still fell short of acceptable standards. Post-flight debriefing was conducted in Conference Room C, a windowless space furnished with government-issue furniture that had seen better decades. Rivera sat at the head of the table, flanked by engineers, project managers, and technical specialists whose expressions ranged from frustrated to resigned. "The good news," announced Dr. Catherine Brenner, the project's lead engineer, "is that we achieved partial target acquisition in 63% of scenarios. The bad news is that partial isn't good enough when you're launching million-dollar missiles." Marcus listened to 20 minutes of technical discussion, most of which covered ground they'd explored in previous meetings. The fundamental problem remained unchanged. The targeting system required split-second timing that current technology couldn't reliably deliver. Various solutions had been proposed, tested, and discarded over months of expensive experimentation. "Blake," Rivera said as the meeting wound down, "any thoughts from the pilot's perspective?" "The system works when it works," Marcus replied carefully. "But the timing lag makes it unreliable in dynamic situations. Maybe the problem isn't making it faster. Maybe it's accepting the lag and compensating for it." Heads turned. Dr. Brenner frowned. "Compensate how?" "Predictive targeting instead of reactive. Calculate where the target will be instead of where it is." "We tried that approach 8 months ago," Dr. Brenner said dismissively. "The computational requirements were prohibitive." Marcus nodded and said nothing more. He'd learned that pushing ideas too hard often backfired, especially when addressing people with advanced degrees and impressive titles. Better to plant seeds and let others think they'd discovered the solutions. The meeting adjourned at 13:47 hours. Marcus had 13 minutes to get to his truck and drive to Chloe's school. As he walked across the tarmac, his phone buzzed with a text message. "Emergency Phoenix meeting 1500 hours. All senior staff required." Rivera Marcus stared at the message, then at his watch. Soccer practice started at 15:30. For 3 years, he'd never missed one of Chloe's games or practices. Not once. He typed back, "Family commitment 15:30. Can attend until 15:20. The response came quickly. This isn't optional. Blake. Marcus stood in the desert heat holding his phone, feeling the weight of competing loyalties that defined his entire life. The emergency meeting convened in the base's secure briefing room, a space designed for classified discussions that could determine the fate of billion-dollar programs. Marcus arrived at exactly 1500 hours, knowing he had 20 minutes before he'd have to choose between his daughter and his career. The room was already filled with familiar faces wearing expressions of barely contained panic. Commander. Rivera stood at the front of the room beside a projection screen displaying budget figures that made Marcus's stomach tighten. The Phoenix Defense Project had consumed $97.3 million over 18 months. 0 successful deployments, 0 reliable test results. The Pentagon's patience had finally reached its limit. Ladies and gentlemen, Rivera began, her voice carrying the weight of impending disaster. I've just concluded a conference call with Defense Secretary Phillips and Admiral Morrison. Effective immediately, the Phoenix Defense Project is under review for cancellation. We have 48 hours to demonstrate significant progress or face complete program termination. A murmur of anxiety rippled through the room. Careers lived and died on projects like Phoenix. The engineers, project managers, and support staff sitting around the polished conference table represented hundreds of collective years of experience. All potentially worthless if the program failed. Dr. Brenner leaned forward in her chair. What constitutes significant progress in their estimation? A working prototype, reliable targeting system, successful test deployment? Rivera's tone suggested she considered these requirements nearly impossible. Essentially, they want us to solve in 2 days what we haven't been able to solve in 18 months. Major Cross spoke from the back of the room. Ma'am, with respect, that's not realistic. The fundamental technical challenges haven't changed. We can't overcome physics through deadline pressure. Tell that to the Pentagon. Rivera clicked to the next slide, revealing a timeline that looked more like a countdown to execution. All available personnel are hereby reassigned to Phoenix, troubleshooting. All leave is cancelled. All non-essential activities are suspended until further notice. Marcus checked his watch. 15:07 hours. In 23 minutes, Chloe would be standing on the soccer field, scanning the sidelines for her father's familiar face. He'd promised her he'd be there. In 3 years, he'd never broken that promise. The technical discussion that followed covered familiar ground with desperate intensity. The targeting system's fundamental flaw remained unchanged. Timing lag between target acquisition and weapon deployment. In aerial combat scenarios, milliseconds meant the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Current technology couldn't bridge that gap reliably. We've explored every conventional approach, Dr. Brenner said, gesturing toward a whiteboard covered with equations and diagrams. Faster processors, improved algorithms, enhanced sensor arrays. Nothing has solved the core timing problem. Marcus watched the clock tick toward 15:20. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Practice starting soon. See you there. Blake. Rivera's voice cut through his mental calculation of drive time to the soccer field. You've logged more Phoenix test hours than anyone. What's your assessment? Marcus stood slowly, aware that every eye in the room was focused on him. These people saw him as the quiet pilot who disappeared early for kid activities, the man who'd chosen family over advancement, the officer who lacked the killer instinct necessary for real success. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Mom, permission to approach the whiteboard. Rivera nodded, though her expression suggested skepticism about what the devoted father could contribute to a problem that had stumped the military's best technical minds. Marcus walked to the front of the room and picked up a marker. The whiteboard was covered with complex calculations, system diagrams, and algorithmic flowcharts that represented months of brilliant work leading to consistent failure. He stared at the equations for a moment, thinking about Chloe's approach to math homework, how she found simple solutions to problems that seemed impossibly complex to adults. The fundamental assumption is wrong, Marcus said quietly. Excuse me? Dr. Brenner's voice carried an edge of irritation. "We're trying to eliminate the timing lag. That's impossible with current technology." Marcus began drawing on a clear section of the whiteboard, not complex equations, but simple diagrams that anyone could understand. "But what if we don't eliminate the lag? What if we use it?" Confused murmurs filled the room. Major Cross shifted in his seat, clearly skeptical that the base's most family-focused pilot was about to solve a problem that had defeated teams of specialists. Marcus drew a simple representation of an aircraft and a target. In aerial combat, targets don't move randomly. They follow predictable flight patterns based on physics, pilot training, and tactical doctrine. Every evasive maneuver has limitations. He added trajectory lines to his diagram. "Instead of trying to target where the enemy is, we target where he'll be." Not reactive targeting, predictive targeting. "We explored predictive algorithms," Dr. Brenner interrupted. "The computational requirements were prohibitive." "Because you were trying to predict everything," Marcus replied, continuing to draw. "What if we only predict the most likely scenarios? What if we accept 80% accuracy instead of demanding perfection?" The room fell silent, except for the whisper of marker on whiteboard. Marcus's diagram was growing more detailed, showing how predictive targeting could compensate for system lag by anticipating target movement rather than reacting to it. Run targeting calculations for the 3 most probable flight paths simultaneously. Marcus continued. When the pilot selects a target, the system has already calculated the most likely intercept points. Instead of computing in real time, we pre-compute and select. Commander Rivera leaned forward. That's brilliant. Instead of trying to make the system faster, we make it smarter." Marcus checked his watch. 15:21 hours. Soccer practice had started. Chloe was on the field looking for him. "Dr. Brenner," Rivera said, her voice suddenly energized, "how quickly could we prototype this approach? If the basic architecture is sound, which it appears to be, we could have a testable system within 36 hours. Blake." Rivera stood, her expression transforming from desperate to hopeful. "This could work. This could actually work." Marcus set down the marker and faced the room full of people who had underestimated him for years. "Yes, ma'am. I believe it will. I'm reassigning you as Phoenix Project Lead, effective immediately. Dr. Brenner, you'll report to Blake for all technical implementation. Major Cross, you'll coordinate logistics support. I want a working prototype ready for testing by 0800 hours day after tomorrow." The room erupted in activity as people began discussing implementation details, resource allocation, and testing protocols. Marcus stood at the whiteboard, still holding the marker, watching his simple diagram transform into the foundation for what could become a revolutionary weapons system. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from Chloe's coach. The soccer team lined up for practice. With one conspicuous gap in the parent seating area, Marcus stared at the photo, then at the room full of excited engineers and officers who were finally taking him seriously, then back at his phone. For the first time in 3 years, he'd broken his promise to his daughter. "Blake," Rivera called from across the room. "Outstanding work. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that wins wars." Marcus nodded and smiled, but his eyes remained fixed on the empty space where he should have been sitting, watching his daughter play the sport she loved, while her father kept the promise that mattered more than any military project ever could. Rivera moved toward the whiteboard, studying Marcus's diagram with the intensity of someone seeing salvation. "This is fundamentally different from anything we've attempted. Instead of fighting the system's limitations, we're leveraging them." "Exactly," Marcus said, adding detail to his drawing. "Current targeting systems fail because they demand perfection in an imperfect environment. This approach accepts imperfection and compensates through intelligence." Dr. Brenner stood and approached the board, her initial skepticism transforming into professional fascination. "The mathematical elegance is remarkable. We're essentially creating a targeting probability matrix rather than pursuing absolute precision. How confident are you that this will work?" Rivera asked. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had spent 18 months failing to solve this problem. Ma'am, in my experience, the simplest solutions are usually the most reliable. This approach leverages proven technology in a new configuration, rather than pushing existing technology beyond its capabilities. Blake, Rivera said, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would affect dozens of careers and hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm placing you in command of Phoenix Project implementation. Dr. Brenner, you'll serve as technical lead under Blake's direction. Major Cross, coordinate all logistics and resource allocation. The announcement hit the room like a shockwave. Marcus saw surprise, respect, and in some cases, resentment flash across familiar faces. Major Cross's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Dr. Brenner nodded with professional acceptance. The younger officers and engineers looked intrigued by the sudden reversal of hierarchy. Sir, Lieutenant Palmer spoke from near the door, what's our implementation timeline? 36 hours to working prototype, Rivera replied. 72 hours to full system test. The Pentagon expects results by Friday morning. Marcus checked his watch again. 24 hours. Soccer practice was well underway. Chloe would be wondering where he was, probably making excuses to her teammates about why her father, who never missed anything, had failed to show up. Ma'am, Marcus said carefully, I need to make one quick stop before we begin implementation. Personal matter. 15 minutes, Rivera's expression hardened. Blake, this project now has absolute priority. Personal matters will have to wait. Understood, ma'am. But I made a commitment that I need to honor, even if briefly. The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of judgment from officers who had always questioned his priorities. Major Cross leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone watching their skepticism validated. Blake, Rivera said quietly, you've just been handed the most important assignment of your career. The success or failure of a $100 million defense program now rests on your shoulders. Are you seriously requesting permission to leave for a personal matter? Marcus met her gaze steadily. Yes, ma'am, I am. The silence stretched longer. Dr. Brenner studied her laptop screen. Major Cross shook his head almost imperceptibly. Rivera's expression was unreadable. Request denied, Rivera said finally. All personnel remain on base until further notice. No exceptions. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. Not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of a promise being shattered. He nodded once. Understood, ma'am. Dr. Brenner, initiate algorithm development immediately. I want preliminary code ready for review within 6 hours. Major Cross, establish round-the-clock shifts. We're working continuous operations until this system is functional. As the meeting dispersed and people began filing toward the door, Marcus remained at the whiteboard, staring at his simple diagram that had somehow changed everything. His phone buzzed with another message from Chloe. Dad? Where are you? Practice is almost over. He typed back slowly. Sorry, kiddo. Work emergency. We'll explain tonight. Her response came quickly. Okay, love you, Dad. 3 words that made his throat tight with guilt and determination. Marcus looked at his diagram again. The simple solution that could save a failing project and transform his career. The same solution that had just cost him his perfect record of keeping promises to his daughter, Blake. Dr. Brenner approached the whiteboard, her expression thoughtful. For what it's worth, your approach is genuinely innovative. We've been so focused on technological solutions that we missed the tactical opportunity. Thank you, Doctor. Call me Catherine. We're going to be working very closely over the next few days. She paused, studying his diagram. May I ask where this insight came from? The predictive approach isn't standard tactical doctrine. Marcus thought about Chloe's math homework, how she instinctively found patterns and shortcuts that escaped more conventional thinking. Sometimes the best solutions come from thinking like a child instead of an engineer. Catherine smiled. My daughter says the same thing. She's 7 and convinced she's smarter than me. She probably is. Marcus felt a sharp pang of missing Chloe's practice, of breaking a tradition that had defined their relationship for 3 years. Kids see possibilities where adults see limitations. Speaking of children, Catherine said carefully, I couldn't help but notice your request to Commander Rivera. Family commitment? Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak about soccer practice and broken promises. I have a daughter too, Catherine continued. The balance is impossible sometimes. The military doesn't make allowances for school plays and soccer games. No, it doesn't. But maybe success gives us more leverage to prioritize what matters. Maybe solving this problem earns us the right to leave work on time occasionally. Marcus looked at her with new respect. Dr. Catherine Brenner, brilliant engineer, devoted mother, and apparently someone who understood the daily struggle between professional achievement and parental duty. Maybe, he agreed. Come on, Catherine said, gathering her laptop and technical manuals. Let's go change the world so we can get home to our kids. As they walked toward the engineering lab, where the next 72 hours would determine the fate of the Phoenix project, Marcus felt his phone buzz one more time. A photo from Chloe's coach showed the team celebrating the end of practice, their faces bright with 9-year-old joy and exhaustion. In the background, the empty parent seating area served as a stark reminder of the choice Marcus had just made. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and followed Catherine toward what he hoped would be the most important 3 days of his career. The Phoenix Defense Project might finally succeed, but Marcus Blake was learning that some victories came with costs he'd never anticipated paying. The question now was whether the success would be worth the sacrifice, and whether he could find a way to be both the leader this project needed and the father Chloe deserved. The metal badge felt heavier than it should have as Marcus pinned it to his flight suit the next morning. Project Leadership Authorization, Phoenix Defense Initiative. The simple piece of brass represented authority he'd never sought and responsibility he wasn't certain he wanted. Around him, the base hummed with unusual energy as word spread that the quiet single father had somehow cracked a problem that had stumped the military's brightest minds. Chloe had been asleep when he'd finally made it. Home the previous night, but she'd left a note on his pillow. Missed you at practice, Dad. Coach Peterson said you must be saving the world. Are you? The carefully formed letters in purple crayon made his chest tight with guilt and pride in equal measure. The morning briefing took place in Conference Room A, a larger space than usual to accommodate the expanded team now under Marcus's command. Dr. Catherine Brenner sat to his right, her laptop open to diagnostic software that would translate his theoretical breakthrough into practical engineering. Major Cross occupied a seat near the back, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language suggesting deep skepticism about the new chain of command. Status report, Marcus said, feeling awkward in his new role, but knowing that hesitation would undermine the confidence Rivera had placed in him. Initial algorithm modeling looks promising, Catherine replied, her fingers dancing across her keyboard as she called up preliminary data. The predictive targeting approach reduces computational load by 67% while maintaining acceptable accuracy rates. We can actually implement this with existing hardware. Around the table, engineers and project specialists leaned forward with the first genuine optimism Marcus had seen in months. Lieutenant Palmer raised her hand. Sir, what about edge cases? Targets executing non-standard maneuvers? We accept reduced accuracy in exchange for system reliability, Marcus replied. Better to hit 80% of targets consistently than to achieve perfect accuracy sporadically. Major Cross cleared his throat. With respect, Blake, military doctrine doesn't accept 80% success rates when lives are at stake. The room grew quiet. Marcus felt the weight of every eye focused on him, waiting to see how he'd handle his first challenge to his authority. Gross was technically correct. Military standards demanded near-perfect performance in life-or-death situations. But Marcus had spent enough time in cockpits to know the difference between theoretical perfection and practical effectiveness. David, Marcus said, using Cross's first name deliberately, what's the current Phoenix success rate? Cross shifted uncomfortably. approximately 12% under optimal conditions. So you're arguing that 12% perfection is preferable to 80% reliability. I'm arguing that we shouldn't compromise standards. I'm arguing that we should achieve standards that are actually achievable. Marcus stood and moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. The perfect is the enemy of the good, Major. We've spent 18 months pursuing perfection and achieved consistent failure. He drew 2 columns on the board. Current system, 12% success rate, theoretically perfect targeting when it works. Proposed system, 80% success rate, predictive targeting that compensates for known limitations. He turned back to face the room. Which system would you rather trust your life to? Cross had no immediate answer. Catherine broke the silence. Marcus is right. We've been so focused on theoretical perfection that we've ignored practical effectiveness. An 80% solution that works consistently is infinitely better than a perfect solution that fails most of the time. Dr. Brenner, Marcus said, grateful for her support. What's our timeline for prototype development? With round-the-clock shifts, we can have testable code within 24 hours. Hardware integration will take another 12 hours. We should be ready for preliminary testing by tomorrow evening. Marcus nodded. Lieutenant Palmer, coordinate with ground crews for test aircraft preparation. Major Cross, I need logistics support for extended operations. We're working continuous shifts until this system is functional. As the meeting dispersed, Cross approached Marcus's position at the front of the room. His expression was carefully controlled, but his voice carried an edge of frustration. Blake, I hope you understand what you've taken on. Project leadership isn't just about having good ideas. It's about managing people, resources, and expectations under extreme pressure. I understand the responsibility, David. Do you? Because yesterday you were a test pilot who left early for soccer games. Today, you're commanding a $100 million defense project. That's not a transition most people can handle. Marcus met Cross's gaze steadily. Are you questioning Commander Rivera's judgment? I'm questioning whether you're prepared for what comes next. Success means increased scrutiny, expanded responsibility, and demands that won't accommodate family schedules. Are you ready for that? The question hit closer to home than Marcus wanted to admit. The previous night, explaining to Chloe why he'd missed her practice had been one of the most difficult conversations of his life. She'd been understanding, too understanding for a 9-year-old, but he'd seen disappointment in her eyes that no amount of explanation could erase. I'll handle whatever comes next. Marcus replied, I hope so. Because if this project fails under your leadership, it won't just be your career that suffers. Every person in this room has invested years of their life in Phoenix. Don't let good intentions overcome practical limitations. Cross left without waiting for a response, leaving Marcus alone with his doubts and the weight of command he'd never sought. Through the conference room windows, he could see aircraft moving across the tarmac in precise formations, each one representing millions of dollars in advanced technology and years of engineering expertise. Soon, those aircraft might carry targeting systems based on his 30-second insight drawn on a chalkboard. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Good luck saving the world today, Dad. I'm proud of you. Marcus smiled despite his anxiety. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices might be required, he had to remember why he was doing this. Not for career advancement or professional recognition, but to build something meaningful that might someday make the world safer for children like Chloe. Catherine appeared in the doorway. Ready to change the world? As ready as I'll ever be. Good, because I've been thinking about your predictive algorithm all night. And I have some ideas that might make it even better. They walked together toward the engineering lab where banks of computers, hummed with the constant processing power, required to transform theoretical concepts into practical technology. The Phoenix project occupied the entire north wing of the building, with workstations arranged around a central display that would show real-time system performance during testing phases. Catherine, Marcus said as they settled into their workstations, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How do you balance being a mother with leading a technical team? How do you manage the competing demands? Catherine paused her typing and looked at him with understanding that came from shared experience. Honestly, some days I don't balance them well at all. Some days I miss bedtime stories because the algorithms won't behave. Some days I leave work early and worry that my team thinks I'm not committed enough. How do you decide which takes priority when they conflict? I've learned that perfect balance is impossible, but good enough balance is achievable. I try to be fully present wherever I am, completely focused on work when I'm here, completely focused on family when I'm home. The transition times are hard, but the clarity helps. Marcus nodded, understanding the wisdom in her approach, even while wondering if he could apply it to his own situation. His relationship with Chloe had been built on consistent presence and reliable availability. The Phoenix Project was challenging those foundations in ways that made him question whether success was worth the cost. "Marcus," Catherine said gently, "your daughter's note this morning about saving the world. That's not just childish imagination. What we're doing here could genuinely save lives in future conflicts. Sometimes the best gift we can give our children is working on problems that matter, even if it means missing soccer practice, even if it means missing some soccer practices, but not all of them." As they began the detailed work of transforming Marcus's conceptual breakthrough into practical software, he felt the familiar satisfaction of technical problem-solving, combined with the new anxiety of leadership responsibility. Around the lab, other engineers were arriving early and staying late, energized by the first real progress the Phoenix Project had achieved in months. By midday, preliminary results were exceeding every expectation they'd established. The predictive targeting algorithms were processing complex scenarios with speed and accuracy that made previous approaches look primitive. Marcus found himself caught between professional excitement and personal guilt as the success of his breakthrough demanded increasing amounts of time and attention as they walked toward the engineering lab where the real work would begin. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. He was about to discover whether his simple insight could transform into revolutionary technology, and whether he could balance the demands of leadership with the promises he'd made to his daughter. The Phoenix Project was about to test everything Marcus Blake thought he knew about himself, his priorities, and the price of success. The only question was whether he was strong enough to pay it. The crayon drawing had traveled from Marcus's kitchen table to his flight suit pocket, to the engineering lab, where it now lay beside his keyboard like a talisman. Chloe's stick-figure masterpiece, two people holding hands in front of what she insisted was an F-16, had become his anchor during 18-hour workdays that blurred together in a haze of code reviews, system diagnostics, and endless coffee. 3 days into the Phoenix Project's resurrection, the preliminary results were nothing short of extraordinary. Catherine's team had transformed Marcus's whiteboard sketch into elegant software that made the impossible seem inevitable. The predictive targeting algorithms were exceeding every performance benchmark they'd established, achieving consistent accuracy rates that dwarfed the original system's sporadic successes. "Target acquisition holding steady at 83%, Catherine announced from her workstation, her voice carrying the exhausted satisfaction of someone who'd discovered that their theories actually worked in practice. Response time averaging 1.2 seconds across all scenarios. Marcus leaned over her shoulder to study the diagnostic readouts flowing across multiple screens. Numbers that had seemed like fantasy a week ago were now becoming routine reality. The targeting system was learning, adapting, improving with each simulation run. "What about the edge cases?" Lieutenant Palmer asked from across the lab. "Targets executing evasive maneuvers?" 71% accuracy, Catherine replied. Still well above acceptable thresholds. Around the lab, exhausted engineers and technicians shared looks of cautious optimism. The Phoenix Project was working. Not perfectly, but reliably, exactly as Marcus had predicted. The simple insight about predictive targeting had unlocked capabilities that months of complex engineering had failed to achieve. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. Chloe's school was hosting their annual science fair tonight, and she'd been working on a project about flight dynamics for weeks. "Don't forget, Dad. Science fair starts at 7 p.m. I'm presenting at 7:30. He checked the lab's wall clock. 6:15 p.m. The science fair was 45 minutes away, but leaving now would mean abandoning his team during the most critical phase of testing. Tomorrow morning, Commander Rivera would brief Pentagon officials on Phoenix project status. The next 12 hours could determine whether their breakthrough led to full program approval or remained an interesting footnote in military engineering history. "Marcus," Catherine called from her workstation. "We're ready for the next simulation series. Full combat scenarios with multiple targets. This was the test that would prove whether their system could handle real-world complexity. Multiple targets, changing priorities, split-second decision requirements. Everything that had broken previous iterations of the Phoenix targeting system. Beginning simulation sequence 7. Lieutenant Palmer announced. Marcus watched the main display as computer-generated aircraft moved through three-dimensional space, executing maneuvers based on actual combat data. The targeting system tracked multiple threats simultaneously, calculating probability matrices for each potential engagement while maintaining overall tactical awareness. "Primary target acquired," Catherine reported. "Secondary targets locked. System recommending engagement sequence." The simulation continued for 17 minutes, longer than any previous test, while the targeting system maintained consistent performance across increasingly complex scenarios. When the final display showed successful completion with minimal targeting errors, the lab erupted in quiet celebration. "Outstanding work, everyone," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from 3 days of continuous briefings. "Dr. Brenner, prepare a comprehensive report for tomorrow's Pentagon presentation. Lieutenant Palmer, coordinate with test flight operations for live aircraft trials." As the team began documenting their success, Marcus looked at his phone again. 6:47 p.m. The science fair would be starting in 13 minutes. Chloe would be standing beside her project display, searching the crowd for her father's familiar face. "Catherine," Marcus said quietly, "can you handle the final documentation without me?" She looked up from her laptop, noting his glance toward his phone. "Family commitment?" "My daughter's science fair. She's presenting a project on flight dynamics," Catherine smiled. "Following in her father's footsteps?" "Something like that." Marcus felt the familiar weight of competing loyalties. "But if you need me here—" "Marcus," Catherine interrupted, "we've achieved something remarkable over the past 3 days. The system is working better than we dared hope. The documentation can wait a few hours, but the Pentagon briefing will be perfect, whether you leave at 7 p.m. or midnight. Your daughter's science fair happens once." Catherine's expression grew serious. "Take it from someone who's missed too many school events. The projects will always be here. The childhood moments won't." Marcus looked around the lab at his team, still energized by their breakthrough despite their exhaustion. Major Cross was reviewing test data with the methodical precision that made him an excellent officer, even if his leadership style differed from Marcus's approach. Lieutenant Palmer was coordinating with the test flight crew for tomorrow's live aircraft trials. The Phoenix project was in capable hands. "Call me if anything urgent develops," Marcus said, gathering his flight jacket and car keys. "We will," Catherine assured him. "Now go see what your daughter has discovered about flight dynamics. I suspect her insights might be as valuable as yours." The drive to Chloe's school took 14 minutes through desert roads that glowed amber in the setting sun. Marcus arrived as families were streaming into the gymnasium, where poster boards and science displays created a maze of childhood curiosity and parental pride. He found Chloe standing beside a display titled "How?" Airplanes Stay Up that featured hand-drawn diagrams of wing cross-sections and airflow patterns. Her explanation of lift and thrust was surprisingly sophisticated for a 9-year-old, incorporating concepts she'd clearly absorbed from years of listening to her father discuss aviation. "Dad!" Chloe's face lit up when she spotted him approaching. "You made it!" "Wouldn't miss it, kiddo." Marcus studied her project with genuine admiration. "This is impressive work. Where did you learn about Bernoulli's principle?" "From you, silly. You explain airplane stuff all the time." Chloe pointed to her diagrams. "I used the same kind of thinking you use for your work projects." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with something deeper, the realization that his daughter had been listening more carefully than he'd realized, absorbing not just facts, but approaches to problem-solving that echoed his own methods. "Tell me about your hypothesis," Marcus said, crouching beside her display. For the next 30 minutes, Chloe walked him through her research with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered that the world was full of fascinating questions waiting to be answered. Her project wasn't just about airplanes, it was about curiosity, persistence, and the joy of understanding how things worked. As other families moved through the science fair displays, Marcus realized that this was exactly where he needed to be, not because his daughter required his presence to succeed, but because these moments, watching her explain her discoveries with bright-eyed enthusiasm, were the experiences that gave everything else meaning. The Phoenix Project would continue tomorrow. The Pentagon briefing would determine the program's future. But tonight, Marcus Blake was exactly where he belonged, listening to his daughter explain how airplanes stay up and remembering why some things mattered more than others. The challenge coin arrived on Marcus's desk without ceremony, placed there by Commander Rivera's aide while he was reviewing flight test protocols. The bronze disc bore the Phoenix Project emblem on one side and Rivera's personal command insignia on the other, a symbol of recognition that carried more weight than any formal commendation. In military culture, challenge coins represented earned respect, the kind that couldn't be assigned or mandated through rank structure. Marcus turned the coin over in his palm, feeling its substantial weight, while Catherine briefed the morning team on overnight test results. The Phoenix targeting system had exceeded every performance benchmark during live aircraft trials, achieving accuracy rates that made previous iterations look primitive by comparison. Word of their success had reached the Pentagon's highest levels, generating interest that both thrilled and unsettled him. Target acquisition times are now averaging 0.8 seconds, Catherine reported, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose theories had been vindicated by practical results. "The predictive algorithms are adapting faster than we anticipated, learning from each engagement scenario." Lieutenant Palmer raised her hand. "What about system integration with existing aircraft? Are we looking at complete retrofits, or can we adapt current platforms?" "Minimal modification required," Catherine replied. "The beauty of Marcus's approach is that it leverages existing hardware more efficiently rather than demanding new technology." Major Cross leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful rather than skeptical for the first time since the project began. "Blake, I have to admit, your solution is more elegant than I expected. Simple, practical, effective." The acknowledgement from Cross meant more than Marcus wanted to admit. Earning respect from colleagues who'd questioned his commitment had been a constant challenge throughout his career, made more difficult by his insistence on maintaining boundaries between work and family obligations. "Thank you, David. But this success belongs to the entire team. Dr. Brenner's engineering made the concept practical. Your logistics coordination kept us on schedule. Lieutenant Palmer's test protocols validated the approach." "Don't deflect credit where it's due," Cross replied. "Good leadership means taking responsibility for failures and sharing credit for successes. But the fundamental insight was yours." Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. He let it go to voicemail, but the interruption reminded him that success was drawing attention from levels of command he'd never engaged with directly. "Sir, Lieutenant Palmer said. "There's something else you should know. Admiral Morrison's office called this morning requesting a full briefing on Phoenix capabilities. They want a presentation ready for next week." The room fell silent. Admiral Morrison oversaw advanced weapons development for the entire Navy. His interest meant the Phoenix project had transcended local success and entered the realm of strategic military planning. "What level of detail are they requesting?" Marcus asked. "Complete technical specifications, operational capabilities, deployment timeline, and cost analysis for fleet-wide implementation." Catherine whistled softly. "Fleet-wide implementation. They're talking about equipping every frontline aircraft with Phoenix targeting systems." The magnitude of what they'd achieved was beginning to dawn on Marcus. His 30-second insight at a whiteboard had evolved into something that could reshape military aviation. But with recognition came pressure, expectations, and demands that would test every assumption he'd made about balancing professional success with personal priorities. "Dr. Brenner," Marcus said, "begin preparing comprehensive documentation. Include performance data, technical specifications, and implementation recommendations. I want everything ready for Admiral Morrison's review." "What about the security classification?" "This level of detail will require top-secret clearance for all personnel involved." Marcus hadn't considered the security implications. Top-secret clearance meant background investigations, lifestyle scrutiny, and restrictions on personal freedom that could affect not just him, but Chloe as well. "Handle the clearance requirements through proper channels," he replied. "We'll adapt to whatever security protocols are necessary." As the meeting dispersed, Marcus remained at the conference table, studying the challenge coin while contemplating how quickly his life was changing. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a test pilot known primarily for leaving work early. Now he was developing weapon systems that could influence global military strategy. His phone buzzed again, another Washington number. This time he answered. "Major Blake, this is Captain Andrews from Admiral Morrison's staff. The Admiral would like to schedule a personal briefing on the Phoenix Defense Project. Are you available for travel to Washington next Thursday?" Marcus checked his calendar. Next Thursday was Chloe's parent-teacher conference, a quarterly meeting he'd never missed in 3 years of single parenthood. "Captain, could we schedule for Friday instead?" "I have a prior commitment Thursday. I'm afraid the Admiral's schedule is quite rigid." "This would be a significant opportunity for you and your project." The implicit message was clear. Admiral Morrison didn't reschedule meetings for junior officers' personal commitments. This was the kind of career-defining opportunity that required absolute prioritization. "Let me confirm my availability and get back to you," Marcus said. "Certainly. But I should mention that the Admiral is particularly interested in meeting the officer who solved the Phoenix targeting problem. Your reputation is preceding you, Major Blake." After ending the call, Marcus sat alone in the empty conference room, weighing competing obligations that seemed increasingly irreconcilable. Chloe's parent-teacher conference represented the kind of engaged parenting he'd promised himself after her mother's death. The Admiral's briefing represented validation of his professional capabilities and potential advancement beyond anything he'd imagined. Catherine appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right? You look like someone who's just realized that getting what you wanted might be more complicated than expected. Admiral Morrison wants a personal briefing next Thursday. Same day as Chloe's parent-teacher conference." "Ah," Catherine's expression showed understanding tinged with sympathy. "The classic dilemma of successful parents. The more indispensable you become professionally, the less available you become personally. How do you handle it?" "The balance." "Badly most of the time," Catherine admitted. "But I've learned that some opportunities can be rescheduled and others can't. Parent-teacher conferences happen quarterly. Meetings with admirals happen once in a career. You think I should prioritize the Pentagon meeting? I think you should make whatever choice you can live with long-term. Success that comes at the cost of your relationship with your daughter isn't really success at all." Marcus pocketed the challenge coin and gathered his briefing materials. Catherine was right about the long-term perspective, but she was also right about career opportunities. The Phoenix Project had opened doors he'd never expected to walk through. The question was whether walking through them would lead him closer to or further from the life he wanted to build with Chloe. Outside the conference room windows, aircraft moved across the tarmac with precision and purpose, each one representing years of engineering advancement and strategic planning. Soon, those aircraft might carry targeting systems based on his insights. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling for what it meant professionally, terrifying for what it might cost personally. The original Phoenix blueprint lay spread across Marcus's desk like an archaeological artifact, its edges yellowed and corners dog-eared from months of handling by frustrated engineers. Catherine had discovered it buried in project archives while preparing documentation for Admiral Morrison's briefing. And what she'd found made both of them question everything they thought they knew about the targeting system's failures. "Look at Section 4.2, Catherine said, pointing to a dense paragraph of technical specifications that had been buried in hundreds of pages of engineering documentation. The original design includes a timing compensation algorithm that was never implemented." Marcus leaned closer, studying text that seemed familiar, yet strangely foreign. "This looks like predictive targeting methodology, because it is. Someone conceived this approach 18 months ago, but it was rejected during the initial design review." Catherine flipped to an appendix filled with margin notes and revision marks. "According to these notes, the engineering team deemed it too simplistic for military applications. The revelation hit Marcus like cold water. His breakthrough insight, the solution that had rescued the Phoenix Project and elevated his career, had been suggested and discarded before he'd ever heard of the program. Everything he'd achieved was built on rediscovering someone else's abandoned idea. Who was the original designer? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would complicate his life further. Catherine checked the signature block at the bottom of the blueprint. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, formerly Senior Systems Engineer on Phoenix Project. She left the program 6 months ago after repeated clashes with Project. Leadership. Marcus recognized the name vaguely. A brilliant engineer who'd reportedly resigned due to creative differences with the original project director. Her departure had been attributed to personality conflicts and unwillingness to work within established parameters. Where is Dr. Walsh now? Private sector. She founded a defense consulting firm that specializes in unconventional weapons system design. Catherine's expression showed the same uncomfortable realization that was settling in Marcus's mind. Marcus, this changes everything. Your solution wasn't innovative, it was archaeological. The distinction mattered more than either of them wanted to admit. Military leadership valued innovation, breakthrough thinking, and problem-solving capabilities that pushed beyond conventional approaches. Rediscovering discarded solutions, while practical, lacked the intellectual authority that had made Marcus's reputation. His phone rang before he could fully process the implications. Commander Rivera's voice carried unusual urgency. "Blake, my office immediately. We have a situation." The walk to Rivera's office felt longer than usual, weighed down by questions about professional integrity and the foundations of his recent success. Marcus found Rivera standing behind her desk, reviewing what appeared to be a personnel file with deep concentration. "Sir," Rivera said without looking up, "we've received an inquiry from Admiral Morrison's staff regarding your background and qualifications for the Phoenix Project leadership role." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What kind of inquiry?" "The kind that suggests someone has raised questions about your credentials. Specifically, whether a test pilot with your experience level possesses the technical expertise necessary to develop advanced targeting systems." "Ma'am, I can provide detailed documentation of my contributions to the project." Rivera finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "That's exactly the problem, Blake. Admiral Morrison's technical advisors are questioning whether your contributions represent genuine innovation or simply competent implementation of existing concepts. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. Someone had informed the Pentagon about Dr. Walsh's original blueprint, casting doubt on Marcus's role in the Phoenix Project's resurrection. The question was, who had access to both the archive documentation and Admiral Morrison's staff? Commander, I take full responsibility for any perception that I've misrepresented my contributions to this project. Blake, I'm not questioning your integrity, but I am questioning whether we've adequately documented the development process. When Admiral Morrison's staff reviews the Phoenix Project, they need to understand exactly how we achieved our breakthrough. Marcus understood the subtext. If the Pentagon discovered that the Phoenix solution was based on discarded work by a former team member, questions would arise about project management, leadership decisions, and resource allocation. Rivera's career was now tied to Marcus's success, making his problems her problems. Ma'am, I recommend we bring Dr. Walsh in as a consulting advisor. Give her proper credit for the original concept while documenting how we developed it into a practical system. That's not possible. Dr. Walsh has been blacklisted from military contracts due to her previous conflicts with project leadership. Bringing her back would raise questions about why we didn't utilize her expertise from the beginning. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's personal phone buzzing with a text from Chloe's school. Parent-teacher conference reminder Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Mrs. Harrison looks forward to discussing Chloe's academic progress and recent behavioral changes. Behavioral changes. Marcus read the message twice, feeling guilt settle like lead in his chest. Over the past 3 weeks, his increased workload had meant later nights, earlier mornings, and decreased attention to the subtle signs that indicated how Chloe was processing her father's transformation from reliable presence to absent professional. "Sir," Marcus said, "I need to address a family matter. My daughter's school has indicated some concerns that require immediate attention." Rivera's expression hardened. "Blake, we're in the middle of a career-defining crisis. Your personal matters will have to wait. With respect, ma'am, my daughter's well-being can't wait for convenient timing. Your daughter's well-being depends on your career stability. If Admiral Morrison loses confidence in the Phoenix Project, everyone associated with it will face career consequences. That includes reduced income, potential reassignment, and diminished advancement opportunities." The argument was logically sound but emotionally hollow. Rivera was right about the professional stakes, but Marcus had learned that career success meant nothing if it came at the cost of Chloe's emotional security. "Commander, I understand the stakes, but I also understand my priorities. My daughter needs her father to be present and engaged, not just professionally successful." "Blake, you're making a mistake. Personal sacrifices are temporary. Career opportunities like this are once in a lifetime." Marcus stood, gathering his materials while contemplating a decision that would define not just his military career, but his identity as both officer and father. The Phoenix Project had given him everything he'd never known he wanted: respect, recognition, and the chance to contribute to something larger than himself. But it was also taking away everything he knew he needed: time with Chloe, presence in her daily life, and the simple satisfaction of being a reliable father. "Ma'am, I'll resolve the documentation issues with Dr. Walsh's original work. But I'm also going to be at my daughter's parent-teacher conference Thursday afternoon." Rivera's expression showed disappointment, mixed with something that might have been understanding. "Blake, I hope you're prepared for the consequences of that choice." As Marcus left Rivera's office, he realized he was finally beginning to understand what those consequences might be and why they might be worth accepting. The classified personnel file landed on Commander Rivera's desk at 0800 hours, delivered by a courier from Pentagon Personnel Command with instructions that it be reviewed immediately and in absolute privacy. Rivera had been expecting routine background verification for Marcus's expanded security clearance. What she discovered instead would force her to reconsider. everything she thought she knew about the quiet test pilot who'd become the Phoenix, Project's unlikely savior, Marcus. Blake's true military record was a masterpiece of deliberate obscurity. Buried beneath years of routine flight test assignments and unremarkable performance evaluations lay a classified service history that read like a legend, carefully hidden in plain sight. Between 2018 and 2021, then Captain Blake had served as the military's premier experimental test pilot, flying aircraft that officially didn't exist and testing weapon systems that would remain classified for decades. The file contained commendations from the highest levels of command, including a personal letter from the Secretary of Defense praising Blake's extraordinary contributions to national security. Through the development and testing of next-generation aviation technologies, his test flight records showed successful missions with prototype aircraft that had claimed the lives of other pilots. Missions so dangerous that they required presidential authorization. But the file's most revealing section dealt with the incident that had ended Blake's meteoric career trajectory. On March 15, 2021, while testing an experimental reconnaissance aircraft over Nevada, Blake had been forced to make an emergency landing that saved his life, but destroyed a billion-dollar prototype. The official report attributed the crash to mechanical failure, but classified addenda told a different story. Blake's wife, Dr. Lisa Chen Blake, had been killed in a car accident while rushing to the base hospital after receiving word that her husband's aircraft was missing and presumed crashed. The emergency landing had taken 3 hours longer than anticipated due to communication system failures, during which Lisa had driven through a thunderstorm trying to reach the base. Her accident occurred 20 minutes before Marcus's aircraft touched down safely. The psychological evaluation that followed painted a picture of a man devastated by guilt and determined to reshape his priorities around the daughter who'd become his sole family. Blake had voluntarily requested transfer to routine test flight duties, deliberately choosing obscurity over advancement to ensure he'd never again risk leaving Chloe orphaned by military service. Rivera read the file twice, absorbing details that recontextualized every interaction she'd had with Blake over the past 2 years. His insistence on leaving work early wasn't lack of commitment. It was the careful vigilance of someone who'd learned that professional dedication could cost everything that truly mattered. His reluctance to seek advancement wasn't limited ambition. It was conscious choice to prioritize presence over prestige. The file also explained his uncanny ability to solve the Phoenix targeting problem. Between 2018 and 2021, Blake had tested virtually every experimental targeting system developed by the military, giving him practical knowledge of approaches that had been attempted, refined or abandoned by classified programs. His insight wasn't genius, it was experience carefully disguised as simplicity. A knock on Rivera's office door interrupted her analysis. Marcus entered at her invitation, his expression showing the strain of managing competing pressures that had defined his past 3 weeks. "Sir, you wanted to see me about the Admiral Morrison briefing." Rivera closed the file and studied Blake's face, seeing for the first time the careful control of someone who'd learned to hide profound capability behind deliberate ordinariness. "Marcus, we need to discuss your background." Something flickered behind Blake's eyes, not surprise, but resignation, as if he'd been expecting this conversation for years. "What specifically, Mom?" "Your classified service record, your actual qualifications for the Phoenix Project leadership role, your reasons for choosing routine assignments over advancement opportunities." Marcus sat down slowly, his posture reflecting the weariness of someone who'd carried secrets for too long. "What would you like to know?" "I'd like to know why one of the military's most accomplished test pilots has been flying routine missions and leaving early for soccer practice." The question hung in the air while Marcus considered how much truth to reveal. Rivera could see him weighing operational security against personal honesty, military discipline against human connection. Because routine missions don't require risking everything that matters, Marcus said finally. Because soccer practice happens whether or not the mission succeeds. Because I learned the difference between being indispensable and being present. Your wife's accident, Marcus nodded. Lisa died because I was testing an aircraft that didn't need to be tested by someone with a family. Because I thought professional excellence justified any personal risk. Because I confused being a good soldier with being a good father, Rivera felt pieces of a complex puzzle clicking into place. Blake's Phoenix breakthrough hadn't been accidental insight, it had been the application of years of classified experience to a problem that others couldn't solve because they lacked his background, the targeting system approach you developed. You'd seen it before. Variations of it, classified programs between 2019 and 2021, explored predictive targeting for hypersonic weapons platforms. Most were cancelled due to computational limitations, but the theoretical framework was sound. So your solution was based on classified knowledge that you couldn't reveal without violating security protocols. Yes, ma'am. Rivera understood now why Blake had seemed so confident in his approach, why his simple diagrams had translated so effectively into practical engineering. He hadn't been guessing, he'd been remembering. Marcus, why didn't you reveal your background when the Phoenix project was struggling? Your expertise could have saved months of development time, because revealing my background would have meant explaining why I'd voluntarily stepped away from classified programs. Would have meant discussing Lisa's death and my decision to prioritize Chloe over career advancement. Would have meant questions about whether I was emotionally stable enough for leadership responsibility. The logic was sound, but heartbreaking. Blake had chosen to let others struggle with problems he could solve, rather than risk having his carefully constructed life disrupted by unwanted attention and advancement opportunities. And now the Phoenix Project's success has drawn exactly the kind of attention I've been avoiding for 3 years. Admiral Morrison's interest means scrutiny, expanded responsibility, and demands that will conflict with my commitments to Chloe. Rivera felt the weight of command decisions that affected not just military operations, but the personal lives of exceptional people who'd made extraordinary sacrifices. Marcus, what do you want? Honestly, Blake was quiet for a long moment, staring out the office window toward the flight line, where aircraft moved through their precise routines. I want the Phoenix project to succeed, because it's good technology that could save lives. I want Chloe to grow up with a father who's present and engaged, rather than absent and accomplished. I want to honor Lisa's memory by being the kind of parent she would have wanted me to be. And if those goals conflict, then I choose Chloe, every time. Rivera understood that she was facing a decision that would define not just the Phoenix Project's future, but Marcus Blake's life trajectory. She could reveal his classified background to Admiral Morrison, ensuring the program's credibility while forcing Blake back into the kind of high-stakes career he'd deliberately abandoned. Or she could protect his carefully maintained anonymity and risk questions about the program's technical foundations. Marcus, there's something else you should know. Someone has been asking questions about your qualifications, suggesting to Pentagon officials that your contributions to Phoenix might be overestimated. Blake's expression hardened. Any idea who? Someone with access to project archives and connections to Admiral Morrison's staff. Someone who knew about Dr. Walsh's original blueprint and your role in developing it into a practical system. As they sat in Rivera's office, both realized that the Phoenix Project's success had created enemies as well as admirers. Someone was actively working to undermine Blake's credibility, and defending against those attacks might require revealing secrets that would transform his carefully managed life in ways he'd spent 3 years trying to avoid the quiet test. Pilot who'd solved the military's most challenging targeting problem was about to discover that hiding extraordinary capability behind ordinary appearance had protected him only until the moment when hiding was no longer possible. The final test flight helmet sat on Marcus's desk, like a monument to the intersection of two worlds he'd tried desperately to keep separate. Custom-fitted and equipped with the latest communication systems, it would connect him to ground control during the Phoenix system's ultimate trial. But the personal modifications made it uniquely his. A small photo of Chloe tucked inside the visor, her gap-toothed grin serving as both inspiration and reminder of everything he had to return home to. Admiral Morrison's arrival at Blackhawk Airbase had transformed the usually efficient military installation into a showcase of precision and protocol. Every surface gleamed, every uniform was pressed to perfection, and every procedure was executed with the kind of meticulous attention that accompanied visits from Pentagon leadership. The Phoenix project team had spent 72 hours preparing for this moment, the definitive test that would determine whether their breakthrough would become standard military equipment or remain an expensive experiment. Marcus stood in the pilot-ready room, running through pre-flight checks with the methodical concentration that had kept him alive through hundreds of test flights. The Phoenix-equipped F-16 waiting on the tarmac represented the culmination of months of engineering work. But today's mission would push both aircraft and targeting system beyond anything they'd attempted previously. 6 aerial targets, multiple threat scenarios, and split-second decision requirements that would test every aspect of their predictive targeting approach. Final systems check complete, Catherine announced from her position at the primary monitoring station. All Phoenix components showing optimal performance parameters. Around the control room, engineers and technicians monitored displays that would capture every microsecond of the test flight's data. Admiral Morrison stood near the observation windows, his presence lending gravity to what had become the most important test flight in Blackhawk's recent history. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Good luck today, Dad. Mrs. Harrison says you're doing important work. Fly safe!" The message carried additional weight because of the conversation he'd had with Chloe's teacher the previous afternoon. Despite Rivera's pressure to prioritize Pentagon meetings over family obligations, Marcus had kept his commitment to attend the parent-teacher conference. What he'd learned there had reinforced every decision he'd made about balancing professional success with parental responsibility. Mrs. Harrison had been direct but compassionate in describing Chloe's recent behavioral changes, increased anxiety, difficulty concentrating, and subtle signs of a 9-year-old struggling to understand why her previously reliable father had become distracted and frequently absent. Not behavioral problems exactly, but the early indicators of a child adapting to reduced parental attention in ways that could become problematic if allowed to continue. "She's not acting out," Mrs. Harrison had explained, "but she's clearly processing some anxiety about changes in her home environment. Has anything significant happened recently that might affect her sense of security?" Marcus had explained about his increased work responsibilities without revealing classified details. Watching Mrs. Harrison's expression show understanding tinged with concern, "Mr. Blake, Chloe talks about you constantly. You're clearly the center of her world, but lately her stories have shifted from things you do together to things you're too busy to do together. That's a significant change for a child her age." The conversation had crystallized Marcus's understanding of the costs associated with his professional success. Chloe was proud of her father's important work, but she was also unconsciously mourning the loss of his consistent presence. The question was whether today's test flight would lead to even greater demands on his time or finally establish the Phoenix system's success sufficiently to allow him to return to more manageable responsibilities. "Blake," Major Cross approached the pilot station, his expression showing respect earned through weeks of successful collaboration. "Outstanding job preparing for today's test. The system integration is flawless. Thank you, David. Dr. Brenner's engineering made it possible. No, your leadership made it possible. I owe you an apology for doubting your capabilities when this project began." The acknowledgement meant more than Marcus had expected. Cross represented the military establishment that had initially questioned his commitment and qualifications. Earning his respect had required proving that dedication to family didn't compromise professional excellence. David, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you balance military career demands with personal relationships? You've been successful at both. Cross considered the question with unusual thoughtfulness. Honestly, I haven't balanced them well. My ex-wife would tell you that I chose career advancement over family stability more often than I should have. Success in the military often requires sacrifices that seem reasonable until you realize what you've actually given up. The conversation was interrupted by Commander Rivera's voice over the intercom. Final briefing in Conference Room A. All primary personnel report immediately. The briefing room was packed beyond capacity, with Admiral Morrison occupying the head of the table, while Pentagon technical advisors flanked him on both sides. The atmosphere carried the weight of a moment that would determine not just the Phoenix Project's future, but the career trajectories of everyone involved. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security. Today's test will determine whether the Phoenix targeting system represents a genuine advancement in military aviation capability. Major Blake, walk me through the test protocol. Marcus stood and moved to the front of the room, feeling the weight of scrutiny from some of the military's most senior leadership. The past 3 weeks had prepared him for this moment, but the stakes felt higher than any test flight he'd ever undertaken. Sir, we'll be conducting 6 engagement scenarios of increasing complexity. The Phoenix system will track multiple aerial targets simultaneously, while calculating optimal engagement sequences based on predicted flight paths, rather than current positions. What makes you confident? This approach will succeed where previous targeting systems have failed. The question went to the heart of everything Marcus had learned about balancing innovation with practicality. Admiral, previous systems failed because they demanded perfection in an imperfect environment. The Phoenix approach accepts limitations and compensates through intelligent prediction, rather than pursuing impossible precision. Admiral Morrison leaned forward. Major Blake, I've reviewed your background. Your qualifications for this project are more extensive than initially apparent. Why haven't you been pursuing advanced assignments commensurate with your capabilities? The room fell silent. Marcus felt every eye focused on him, waiting to see how he'd respond to a question that touched on the most personal aspects of his military service. Sir, I've learned that professional capability means nothing without personal grounding. My daughter needs a father who's present and engaged, not just successful and absent. And you believe you can maintain both professional excellence and family commitment? Sir, I believe they're complementary rather than conflicting. The stability and perspective that come from strong family relationships actually enhance professional performance. Admiral Morrison studied Marcus, with the assessment of someone evaluating character as much as capability. Major Blake, if today's test succeeds, the Phoenix system will require expanded development, fleet-wide implementation, and ongoing leadership from someone with your expertise. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? The question represented everything Marcus had been trying to avoid for 3 years: expanded responsibility, increased visibility, and demands that would inevitably conflict with his commitments to Chloe. Admiral, I'm prepared to serve wherever the military needs me, within parameters that allow me to fulfill my obligations as a single father. And if those parameters conflict with military requirements... Marcus looked around the room at faces showing various combinations of curiosity, concern, and judgment. Catherine offered an encouraging nod. Cross watched with respectful attention. Rivera's expression showed understanding of the difficult position he was navigating. Sir, I believe the military is best served by personnel who understand their priorities and maintain their commitments. If the Phoenix system requires leadership that compromises my ability to be the father my daughter needs, then it should be led by someone whose circumstances allow them to meet those demands. Admiral Morrison was quiet for a long moment, considering Marcus's response with the deliberation of someone weighing complex factors. Major Blake, that's either the most honest answer I've heard from a junior officer or the most career-limiting. We'll find out which after today's test flight. As the briefing concluded and personnel began moving toward the flight line, Marcus felt the weight of impending decision points that would determine his future relationship with both military service and family life. The Phoenix system's success had created opportunities he'd never sought and responsibilities he wasn't certain he wanted. But as he walked toward the aircraft that would either validate or end his involvement with the Phoenix project, Marcus carried Chloe's photo in his helmet and her encouragement in his heart. Whatever happened in the next few hours, he would face it as both the skilled pilot he'd always been and the devoted father he'd chosen to become. The Phoenix flight data recorder hummed quietly in its reinforced housing behind Marcus's seat, capturing every system parameter and pilot input that would either validate months of engineering work or document the failure of the military's most ambitious targeting system. As he taxied toward the active runway, Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with test flights, but today carried additional pressure from Admiral Morrison's observation, team, and the knowledge that his daughter was watching from the base's visitor gallery. "Phoenix 1, you are cleared for takeoff," came the voice of air traffic control. "Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Good hunting." Marcus advanced the throttles and felt the F-16 accelerate with the precise responsiveness that had made it the backbone of military aviation for decades. The Phoenix targeting system's modifications were invisible from the outside, but the additional displays and control interfaces in the cockpit represented a fundamental evolution in how pilots would engage aerial threats. "Phoenix 1 airborne," Marcus reported as the aircraft lifted off Blackhawk's main runway. "All systems nominal. Beginning climb to test altitude." Through his headset, he could hear the controlled excitement in Catherine's voice as she monitored system performance from the ground control station. "Marcus, all Phoenix components showing green across the board. Target drones are airborne and positioning for the first engagement scenario." The test protocol would progress through 6 increasingly complex scenarios, beginning with single target engagement and building toward multiple simultaneous threats that would challenge every aspect of the predictive targeting approach. But first, Marcus needed to reach the designated test altitude and complete final systems checks. At 15,000 feet, the desert landscape below stretched toward distant mountains, like a tactical map rendered in earth tones. Marcus had flown over this terrain hundreds of times, but today the familiar geography would serve as the backdrop for the most important test flight of his career. Ground control, Phoenix 1 level at test altitude. Ready to begin engagement scenarios. Roger, Phoenix 1. Target drone Alpha is approaching from bearing 270, distance 12 miles. You are cleared to engage when ready. Marcus activated the Phoenix targeting system and watched as his displays populated with tracking data that would have been impossible with conventional equipment. The predictive algorithms were analyzing the target drone's flight path, calculating multiple probability matrices for where it would be at various engagement points. "Target acquired," Marcus reported. Phoenix system showing target projection solutions. This was the moment that would validate or disprove their entire approach. Instead of trying to track the target's current position with impossible precision, the Phoenix system was calculating where the target would most likely be when a missile reached intercept range. "Missile away," Marcus announced, triggering a training round that would prove targeting accuracy without destroying the expensive drone aircraft. The missile tracked perfectly toward the projected intercept point, confirming target destruction with surgical precision that exceeded anything Marcus had achieved with conventional targeting systems. Ground control, that's a confirmed hit. Phoenix system performance exceeded parameters. Cheers erupted in the background of Catherine's transmission. "Outstanding, Marcus. Target acquisition time was 0.6 seconds, well below our minimum requirements. Ready for Scenario 2? The second engagement involved two targets approaching from different vectors simultaneously. Marcus watched his displays populate with dual tracking solutions as the Phoenix system calculated optimal engagement sequences for both threats. Targets acquired. System recommending engagement priority based on threat. Assessment. This was where previous targeting systems had consistently failed. The computational load of tracking multiple threats while calculating engagement. Solutions had overwhelmed processing capabilities. But the Phoenix system's predictive approach was handling the complexity with apparent ease. Engaging primary target, Marcus reported, followed moments later by secondary target engaged. Both training rounds found their marks with the same precision as the first engagement, validating the system's ability to manage multiple simultaneous threats. 3 for 3. Marcus, Catherine's voice carried growing excitement. Admiral Morrison's technical team is reviewing the data in real time. They're impressed. Scenarios 4 and 5 continued the pattern of flawless performance, with the Phoenix system demonstrating capabilities that justified every hour of development work and every dollar of engineering investment. But Scenario 6 would test the system's ultimate limits, 4 targets approaching from different altitudes and vectors, simulating a coordinated attack that would challenge both pilot and technology. Phoenix 1. Final scenario involves maximum complexity engagement. 4 target drones approaching your position from multiple vectors. You are cleared to engage when ready. Marcus studied his displays as the Phoenix system processed the most challenging targeting problem it had ever encountered. 4 separate tracking solutions, multiple engagement priorities, and split-second timing requirements that would test the predictive algorithm's ability to handle real-world combat complexity. Targets acquired. Phoenix system calculating engagement matrix, but as Marcus prepared to begin the final engagement sequence, warning lights began flashing across his primary flight displays. Hydraulic pressure was dropping rapidly in the aircraft's primary flight control system, a potentially catastrophic failure that could cost him control of the aircraft. Ground control. Phoenix 1 declaring emergency. Primary hydraulic failure. Breaking off engagement to assess aircraft status. The test flight that had progressed flawlessly was about to become a life-or-death demonstration of both pilot skill and system reliability under the worst possible circumstances. The victory message crackled through Marcus's headset with crystalline clarity, cutting through the chaos of emergency procedures and system failures that had dominated the previous 10 minutes. Phoenix 1, this is ground control. We show successful completion of all engagement scenarios. Outstanding flying, Marcus. Phoenix system performance exceeded every benchmark we established, but the celebration in Catherine's voice was tempered by the reality of Marcus's current situation. The F-16's primary hydraulic system had failed completely, leaving him with backup controls that responded sluggishly to his inputs. In most circumstances, standard procedure would be immediate return to base and emergency landing preparations. However, the final targeting scenario remained incomplete, and Admiral Morrison's evaluation team needed those results to make their recommendation to Pentagon leadership. Ground control. Phoenix 1. I can complete the final engagement sequence despite hydraulic complications. Request permission to continue mission. The radio silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in aviation terms. Marcus could imagine the intense discussion taking place in the control room as Catherine, Commander Rivera, and Admiral Morrison weighed mission completion against pilot safety. Phoenix 1, negative on mission continuation. Return to base immediately for emergency landing procedures. Marcus studied his flight controls, feeling the aircraft's reluctant response to his commands. The backup hydraulic system was functional but degraded, requiring constant pilot compensation to maintain stable flight. Most pilots would follow orders and return home immediately. But Marcus Blake wasn't most pilots, and the Phoenix system's final validation was too important to abandon. Ground control. Phoenix 1. I'm continuing the final engagement sequence. Aircraft is controllable and mission completion is achievable. The response came from Commander Rivera personally. Blake, that's a direct order. Return to base immediately. Marcus looked at the photo of Chloe tucked inside his helmet visor, her 9-year-old smile reminding him of everything he had to live for and return home to. But he also understood that the Phoenix system's complete validation could save the lives of countless military personnel in future conflicts. This wasn't about personal heroics, it was about professional responsibility and the obligation to see important work through to completion. Ground control, understand your concerns. But this mission is too important to leave incomplete. Beginning final engagement sequence now. He could hear Admiral Morrison's voice in the background, though the words were indistinct. Then Catherine's voice returned, tight with controlled emotion. Marcus, be careful. We need you back on the ground in one piece. The 4 target drones were approaching from different vectors, creating the most complex targeting challenge the Phoenix system had ever encountered. Under normal circumstances, this scenario would test the limits of both pilot and technology. With degraded flight controls, it would require flying skills that drew on every hour of Marcus's extensive experience. Targets acquired, Marcus reported, fighting to keep his voice steady as the aircraft bucked against his control inputs. Phoenix system calculating engagement matrix. The predictive targeting algorithms were working flawlessly, providing engagement solutions that compensated for the aircraft's reduced maneuverability. Marcus could see the optimal intercept points for all 4 targets, but reaching those positions would require precision flying that pushed both him and the damaged aircraft to their limits, engaging. Primary target, the first missile tracked perfectly toward its projected intercept point, confirming the target engagement with surgical precision despite the aircraft's control complications. Target 1 neutralized. Engaging secondary threat. Marcus pulled the aircraft through a sharp turn that tested the backup hydraulic system's capabilities, feeling the controls respond just quickly enough to achieve proper firing position for the second engagement. Target 2 neutralized. Proceeding to tertiary engagement, the 3rd and 4th targets required rapid-fire sequential engagements that would challenge the Phoenix system's ability to process multiple targeting solutions while Marcus fought to maintain aircraft control with degraded systems. Targets 3 and 4 engaged. Simultaneously, both missiles tracked to their predicted intercept points with the same precision as all previous engagements, completing the final scenario with performance that validated every aspect of the Phoenix targeting approach. Ground control, that's mission complete. All 6 scenarios successfully executed. Phoenix system demonstrated full operational capability under both normal and emergency conditions. The radio erupted with celebration as ground control confirmed successful completion of the most challenging test flight in the program's history. But Marcus's work wasn't finished. He still needed to bring the damaged aircraft home safely, a task that would require every skill he'd developed during years of test pilot experience. Phoenix 1, outstanding mission completion. Now let's get you back on the ground. Vector for emergency approach on runway 27. Marcus began his descent toward Blackhawk Airbase, fighting the damaged aircraft's tendency to roll unpredictably while maintaining the precise control necessary for emergency landing procedures. Through his canopy, he could see the base approaching in the distance, with emergency vehicles positioned along the runway in case of landing complications. Ground control, Phoenix 1 on final approach. Aircraft handling within acceptable parameters for emergency landing. As the runway grew larger in his windscreen, Marcus thought about Chloe waiting in the visitor gallery, about the Phoenix system's successful validation, and about the choices that had led him to this moment of professional triumph achieved at considerable personal risk. The landing would complete more than just a test flight. It would mark the end of one chapter in Marcus Blake's life and the beginning of whatever came next. 3 months after the Phoenix test flight that had redefined his military career, Marcus Blake stood at his office window watching F-16s taxi across the tarmac with targeting systems based on his predictive algorithms. The family photo on his desk had been updated. Instead of Chloe's crayon drawing, it now showed both of them at the base's Family Day celebration. Her arms wrapped around his neck while she wore a miniature flight helmet that made her look like a tiny pilot. The Phoenix program. Directorate occupied a new building constructed specifically to house the expanded development team that had grown from Catherine's small engineering group into a comprehensive research and development operation. Marcus's corner office reflected his new position as program director, but he'd insisted on modifications that previous military leaders might have considered unconventional. A bulletin board displaying Chloe's artwork, a shelf lined with her favorite books for the evenings when work ran late, and a comfortable chair positioned to catch afternoon sunlight where she could do homework while he finished administrative duties. "Dad!" Chloe called from that chair, where she was working on a mathematics assignment that would have challenged students twice her age. "Can you help me with this problem about trajectory calculations?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the irony of his 9-year-old daughter requesting assistance with concepts that formed the foundation of the targeting systems he'd developed. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had evolved into something deeper than the careful balance he'd maintained for years. She was becoming genuinely interested in his work while he'd learned to integrate her presence into his professional responsibilities. "What kind of trajectory?" Marcus asked, moving to look over her shoulder at homework that appeared surprisingly sophisticated. "Mrs. Harrison says we're studying advanced problem-solving. She gave me extra credit problems about predicting where moving objects will be instead of where they are now." The familiar concepts made Marcus laugh. Chloe's teacher had clearly been inspired by the news coverage of the Phoenix Project's success to incorporate predictive mathematics into her curriculum. His daughter was learning the same principles that had revolutionized military targeting systems, though applied to considerably less dramatic scenarios. "Show me what you're thinking," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her. For the next 20 minutes, they worked through problems that required calculating future positions based on current movement patterns, exactly the approach that had made the Phoenix system so effective. Watching Chloe grasp these concepts intuitively reinforced Marcus's understanding that the most powerful solutions often emerged from the simplest insights. Knock on his office door interrupted their mathematics session. Catherine entered, carrying a tablet displaying test results from the latest Phoenix system upgrades, her expression showing the satisfaction of someone whose engineering theories had been validated by practical success. "Marcus, the fleet-wide installation reports are exceeding all projections. Pilot feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and targeting accuracy improvements are averaging 87% across all platforms. Any technical issues requiring attention, minor software refinements, but nothing that affects operational capability. The system is performing exactly as designed." Catherine noticed Chloe's homework and smiled. "Learning about trajectory calculations. Dad's helping me understand how to predict where things will be instead of just seeing where they are," Chloe replied with the enthusiasm of someone discovering that mathematics could be genuinely interesting. "That's the same principle your father used to create the Phoenix targeting system," Catherine explained. "He figured out how to make computers think like smart children instead of trying to be perfect machines." Marcus felt the familiar warmth of professional accomplishment balanced by personal satisfaction. The Phoenix Project had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, earning him recognition throughout the military aviation community. But more importantly, it had established a sustainable approach to balancing career excellence with family commitment. The transformation in his daily routine had been gradual but profound. Instead of leaving work early for Chloe's activities, he now structured his responsibilities around her schedule from the beginning. Soccer practices were blocked time on his calendar. Parent-teacher conferences took precedence over Pentagon meetings. Evening homework assistance was as important as morning briefings. Admiral Morrison had initially questioned this approach during their first quarterly review meeting. "Major Blake, your performance standards remain exceptional, but your availability for extended operations appears limited by personal constraints. Sir, I believe my effectiveness comes from maintaining those constraints rather than despite them. The perspective and stability that come from strong family relationships actually enhance my professional judgment." The Admiral had studied Marcus with the expression of someone evaluating an unconventional but potentially valuable approach to military leadership. "Major Blake, if your results continue at current levels, you'll be promoting to Lieutenant Colonel within the year. Are you prepared for expanded responsibilities?" "Yes, sir, within parameters that preserve my ability to be the father my daughter needs. And if those parameters conflict with military requirements, then we'll find creative solutions that serve both purposes, or I'll recommend someone whose circumstances allow them to meet requirements I cannot." 3 months later, the promotion had come with assignment to a position that recognized both his technical expertise and his insistence on maintaining family priorities. The military had discovered that exceptional performance from someone with clear boundaries was preferable to adequate performance from someone with unlimited availability. "Dad," Chloe said, closing her mathematics workbook, "are you really helping make airplanes safer for other pilots?" "That's the goal, kiddo. The Phoenix system helps pilots make better decisions faster, which means they can complete their missions and come home to their families. Like how you always come home to me?" Marcus felt the weight of promises kept and priorities honored. Exactly like that. As evening approached and the base grew quiet around them, Marcus gathered his materials while Chloe packed her homework. Their drive home would include her excited description of the day's discoveries, his explanation of engineering challenges she'd find interesting, and the comfortable routine of two people who'd learned that success meant different things to different people. The Phoenix Defense Project had exceeded every technical benchmark and operational requirement. But for Marcus Blake, its greatest achievement was proving that professional excellence and personal commitment weren't competing priorities. They were complementary strengths that made each other possible.